Reviews for Harry and Meghan's big-budget Netflix series have so far been less than kind.
For years, Harry and Meghan appeared to be building an empire beyond palace control. But one private conversation inside royal circles allegedly exposed a very different reality, one involving shrinking reserves, expensive promises, and a warning from William that everyone once dismissed as jealousy. The revelation did not arrive as a public announcement. There was no formal statement, no carefully prepared briefing, and no name attached to the claim. It moved quietly through royal and media circles, carried in guarded conversations and nervous questions. The shock was not that Harry and Meghan were suddenly penniless. No serious voice was suggesting that. The real disturbance came from something far more believable and therefore far more dangerous. Their private financial position, the source reportedly claimed, was not as secure as the image surrounding them. From the outside, everything appeared carefully controlled. Freedom, influence, expensive surroundings. Global recognition. A life built far beyond palace gates. They had presented themselves as people who no longer needed royal permission, royal money, or royal protection to define their future. Yet behind that image, pressure may have been building slowly. Costs remained high. Projects took time. Promised income did not always mean money immediately available. And the distance between what their name was believed to be worth and what they could actually access may have been growing. But one question immediately darkened the story. How could anyone connected to the palace know what remained in Harry and Meghan's private accounts after they had stepped away? The answer, according to the whispers, was that no one needed to see a bank statement. Financial details may have surfaced indirectly through security discussions, legal arrangements, property obligations, inheritance planning, trust structures, or private requests passed through intermediaries. Each conversation revealed only a fragment. Together, those fragments allegedly formed a picture the palace could no longer ignore. And somewhere inside that picture was William. Long before the latest claim, he had reportedly warned Harry that fame was not the same as financial stability. International attention could create opportunities, but attention moved quickly. Contracts ended. Audiences changed. Expenses remained. Harry, however, allegedly heard something else. He heard control. He heard doubt. He heard his older brother questioning whether he could survive without the institution that had shaped every part of his life. Meghan reportedly saw the future differently. She believed their global recognition was not fading power, but raw potential, a foundation strong enough to support media ventures, partnerships, products, and a new commercial identity. Yet the danger was not simply overspending, it was the widening gap between future earnings and money available now. Inside palace circles, one phrase was allegedly used to describe it. Wealth on paper, pressure in practice. And the most unsettling part was still hidden. The source's claim had not begun with a bank statement. It had begun with a warning attached to one of Harry and Meghan's most valuable assets. And to understand why that warning caused such alarm, the story must return to the moment Harry and Meghan exchanged royal protection for a far more dangerous promise: complete financial independence. When Harry and Meghan stepped away, the world saw liberation. Behind the celebration, however, came security costs, property payments, legal bills, staff salaries, and an unforgiving truth: royal life had been restrictive, but it had also hidden the enormous price of being globally famous. Their departure was presented as a break from control, a chance to choose their own path and protect their family on their own terms. Emotionally, it was a declaration of independence. Financially, it was the moment the protection of the institution disappeared. Costs that had once been absorbed, negotiated, reduced, or quietly managed through royal systems allegedly became personal obligations almost overnight. Security became the deepest pressure point. For Harry, protection was never just another expense. It was tied to his birth, his mother's death, the threats surrounding his family, and the fear that one mistake could carry an unbearable price. He reportedly viewed security as permanent and non-negotiable. But permanent protection required permanent money, and unlike royal funding, commercial income could rise, fall, or vanish. Then came everything else. A high-profile home, professional staff, public relations advisors, lawyers, travel, production teams, business development, insurance, maintenance. The constant pressure to appear successful in a world that measured their freedom through visible signs of wealth. Every part of the new life carried a cost, and every cost continued whether a project succeeded or failed. This was where the headlines became misleading. A deal described as worth millions did not mean millions arrived in one payment. Contracts could be divided across years, tied to performance, reduced by production expenses, commissions, taxes, legal fees, and business obligations. The number announced publicly could be enormous, while the amount available for daily life remained far smaller. Meghan reportedly understood that reality, but she also believed the answer was expansion. More projects, more partnerships, new brands, lifestyle ventures, a stronger public identity. To her, momentum was not vanity. It was survival, and proof that leaving the palace had not reduced their power. Harry's discomfort allegedly grew in the opposite direction. The machinery of commercial success demanded visibility, consistency, and access to the very private pain he had spent years trying to escape. Every new opportunity seemed to ask for another piece of the story. That tension reportedly created their first serious disagreement over money. Harry wanted stability, protection, and predictable reserves. Meghan believed caution could become paralysis, and that disappearing from public view would weaken everything they were building. William's fear, according to palace whispers, was never that Harry would earn nothing. It was that he would build permanent expenses around temporary attention. Then came a private financial review that allegedly forced advisors to separate impressive contract headlines from the money Harry and Meghan could actually reach. That distinction would become the first crack in the public illusion, because the deals that looked enormous from the outside were far more complicated once the palace began asking what money had actually reached Harry and Meghan. The numbers printed in headlines seemed almost impossible to question. Yet behind every celebrated agreement were conditions, deadlines, production costs, and expectations. According to the alleged insider, William never doubted Harry could attract money. He doubted whether Harry understood how quickly impressive figures could disappear. Again and again, Harry and Meghan were linked to deals described in breathtaking terms. The figures created an image of total security, as though one signature had replaced everything the palace once provided. To the public, the story looked simple. They had left royal life and found something even more powerful. But the source allegedly claimed those numbers were never as straightforward as they appeared. A contract's full value was not the same as personal income. Some payments depended on completed projects. Others arrived in stages. Before money reached Harry and Meghan, management percentages, legal costs, taxes, production budgets, staff salaries, development expenses, and outside partners could all take their share. Ideas that never moved forward could still consume months of work and large sums of money. Delays mattered. Cancelled concepts mattered even more. For Meghan, however, these agreements carried an emotional meaning far beyond profit. Each partnership was proof that they could succeed without palace approval. Every new announcement challenged the belief that royal titles had been the true source of their influence. She allegedly saw the contracts as the beginning of a permanent empire, not temporary opportunities. Harry's anxiety reportedly grew as the expectations behind those deals became clearer. Commercial success demanded regular material, controlled publicity, public appearances, and access to personal experiences. The more valuable their story became, the more pressure there was to keep telling it. Freedom had opened the door, but the business built around that freedom was beginning to demand its own form of obedience. Then, one major project reportedly performed well, drawing attention and proving that the couple could still command a global audience. Yet behind closed doors, the success did not create the lasting financial engine advisors had hoped for. The result brought recognition, but not enough predictable income to remove the pressure. Other ideas required heavy investment before producing anything reliable. Their home, meanwhile, stood as both a symbol of safety and a source of constant obligation, valuable, impressive, and expensive to maintain, insure, finance, staff, and protect. This was the warning William had allegedly tried to give. Public fascination could generate sudden wealth, but it could not be treated like guaranteed royal income. Harry believed his brother was predicting his downfall. William reportedly believed he was trying to stop it. More troubling still, inheritance money once considered untouchable may have been drawn further into family security and business costs than palace insiders expected. Then, an alleged confidential estimate arrived, placing Harry and Meghan's liquid position far below the fortune attached to their names. But before that estimate could be understood, another question had to be answered. How did William know enough to issue such a precise warning years before the financial pressure allegedly became impossible to hide? Harry believed his brother wanted to limit him. Meghan allegedly believed William underestimated her. But the warning remembered inside palace circles was colder and more specific. Contracts would end, public sympathy would shift, expenses would remain. And Harry might one day discover that independence had become another form of dependence. Beneath the public arguments, damaged trust, and bitter accusations, money had allegedly become one of the quiet forces pulling the brothers apart. William did not view finance as a series of exciting opportunities. He had been raised to think in decades. Property had to be protected. Spending had to be controlled. Resources were not simply enjoyed, they were preserved for the next generation and guarded against sudden crisis. Harry's relationship with money was far more emotional. Wealth had always surrounded him, yet control over it had often belonged to someone else. The institution decided what was funded, what was protected, and what was considered necessary. After losing his mother and living under constant public attention, financial caution could feel less like advice and more like another invisible chain. That was why William's alleged warning cut so deeply. He reportedly feared that Harry and Meghan were treating global attention, brand estimates, and promised contracts as permanent wealth. In one private exchange, William allegedly argued that independence required more than earning large sums. It required lowering obligations before interest faded, preserving cash when offers were plentiful, and preparing for the moment when the world became fascinated by someone else. Harry may have heard only an attack on Meghan. To him, the warning suggested that William did not believe she could build anything lasting. Worse, it sounded like an attempt to frighten them back toward palace obedience. Meghan reportedly saw the monarchy as trapped in an older system. She believed royal advisors underestimated streaming platforms, global audiences, personal brands, social influence, and the speed at which modern fame could become a business. The palace valued preservation. She valued expansion. That was the tragedy. Both sides may have understood part of the danger, but they were speaking different languages. Harry and Meghan spoke of freedom. William spoke of survival. His darkest concern was not simply that the money might shrink. It was that Harry would eventually be forced to protect an expensive life by selling repeated access to the family he claimed to be escaping. Each revelation might bring income, but it would also deepen the wound. Palace officials allegedly followed the couple's commercial path for another reason. A financial crisis involving the king's son could never remain entirely private. It could become a family scandal, a reputational threat, and a question the Crown would eventually be forced to answer. William's warning reportedly included a minimum reserve Harry should never cross. Now, the source claimed, the couple were dangerously close to, or already beneath, that line. Then came the number itself, the figure that allegedly explained the contracts, the tension, the urgency, and the reason William's old warning suddenly no longer sounded cruel. The public imagined tens of millions sitting untouched behind guarded gates. The alleged palace source described something far less secure: valuable assets, future earning potential, and a famous name, but only a fraction of that wealth immediately accessible once debts, taxes, business commitments, and protected reserves were separated. Then came the figure that changed the entire story. According to the alleged source, Harry and Meghan's immediately accessible personal cash reserve was not the vast fortune many outsiders assumed. It was reportedly closer to $6 million to $8 million. By ordinary standards, that was still extraordinary wealth. But their world was not ordinary. The figure allegedly excluded the estimated value of their residence, business entities, intellectual property, future contracts, and anything that could not be quickly converted into usable cash. A valuable home could strengthen their public image while doing little to pay tomorrow's security invoice. A promising company could look powerful on paper while still requiring constant investment. And the costs never paused. Private protection, property payments, staffing, lawyers, public relations, travel, production development, insurance, business advisors. The endless expense of maintaining a life watched by millions. Even several $1 million could begin to feel dangerously limited when surrounded by obligations designed for permanent fame. The source's next claim was even more unsettling. A significant part of the available reserve was allegedly protected from ordinary spending. Money had reportedly been set aside for taxes, emergencies, outstanding commitments, the children's futures, and projects already in development. Once those sums were separated, the amount Harry and Meghan could freely use may have been far lower than the headline figures suggested. That was the line William had allegedly feared they would cross. His warning was not that Harry would suddenly have nothing. It was that he needed enough untouched money to protect his family for years without depending on another contract, another interview, or another wave of public fascination. In that narrow but painful sense, William may have been right all along. Fame had created wealth, but it had not created the effortless permanence Harry may once have expected. For Harry, the realization reportedly carried a private humiliation. Seeking royal assistance, even indirectly, would appear to confirm the warning he had rejected as control. It would mean admitting that complete independence had developed limits. Meghan's alleged response was different. Not surrender. Strategy, new launches, partnerships, appearances, media projects, and commercial activity could rebuild momentum. But that raised another question. Was their renewed visibility driven by ambition, or by the need to stop their reserves from falling further? One palace figure reportedly argued that the number was not catastrophic. Another gave a colder assessment. The balance mattered less than the speed at which it was shrinking. That was the true danger. Not immediate ruin, but the gradual loss of choice. As reserves narrowed, dependence on investors, publicity, commercial partners, and personal revelations would only deepen. Then came the source's most explosive allegation. Quiet discussions may already have begun over how the couple could receive help without publicly appearing to return to royal dependence. The number answered the public mystery, but it opened a more dangerous one: whether Harry had quietly begun searching for a path back to the security he once rejected. As the financial pressure allegedly deepened, Harry faced the possibility he feared most: not poverty, but dependence. Any request for help could be interpreted as surrender, while refusing assistance might force him to turn private wounds into the only currency powerful enough to sustain his freedom. The first signs reportedly appeared through quiet, carefully worded communications. Harry did not approach the palace with an open request for money. That would have been too direct, too humiliating, and too easy to weaponize. Instead, questions allegedly moved through family intermediaries, legal representatives, and former palace contacts still trusted enough to carry a sensitive message without turning it into a public confrontation. The questions sounded practical. Could security arrangements be reconsidered during visits to Britain? Could suitable accommodation be provided without forcing Harry into a formal royal setting? What protection might exist for the children in the future? How would inheritance structures work? Could private family access be separated from official duty? Each question had financial consequences. If Harry could reduce security and accommodation costs while in Britain, even temporarily, it could offer meaningful relief without looking like a direct payment. He reportedly hoped for a narrow arrangement, private support as a son, without any return as a working royal. But inside the palace, that distinction was far from simple. Advisors allegedly feared that any informal rescue would create a devastating impression. Harry and Meghan had criticized the institution publicly. If the same institution then supported them privately, critics could accuse the crown of rewarding attacks while hiding the cost. What appeared to be family compassion could quickly become a reputational crisis. Charles was said to be caught in the most painful position. As a father, he could not easily ignore the possibility that his son felt trapped. As king, however, he had to protect the crown from becoming a permanent safety net whenever Harry's independent life became difficult. William's position was reportedly colder. He believed support without accountability would not solve the underlying problem. It would only delay the reckoning and allow Harry to avoid reducing expenses, changing strategy, or accepting the limits of commercial attention. Meghan allegedly saw even greater danger. Any palace-backed arrangement could reopen the door to influence over their schedule, public statements, business decisions, children, and private life. Harry might call that protection. Meghan could see it as control returning under a softer name. That difference may have created another private fracture between them. Harry reportedly viewed family protection as something connected to his birth and history. Meghan viewed independence as meaningless if the palace could still attach conditions to their future. Caught between the family he left and the family he built, Harry faced an impossible choice. A private solution involving property, security, or trust arrangements was allegedly discussed. No public bailout. No obvious transfer, just enough support to ease the pressure. But the palace's willingness to help reportedly depended on one condition Harry might never accept: silence. And that condition would push the crisis beyond money, because the final battle was not over a bank account, it was over who controlled the story of why the account had fallen. Where Harry allegedly saw a closing trap, Meghan saw a challenge that could still be reversed. New ventures, controlled appearances, strategic partnerships, and carefully timed revelations offered a path forward, but every move risked confirming the palace's claim that their independence now depended on remaining publicly visible. Meghan reportedly refused to treat the financial pressure as defeat. To her, the answer was not retreat, silence, or a quiet return to royal protection. It was movement. She allegedly believed their remaining influence could still be transformed into something stronger than temporary contracts: ownership. That meant consumer brands, media projects, licensing agreements, speaking opportunities, and carefully selected partnerships. The goal was no longer simply to secure another impressive deal. It was to create recurring income, money that could continue arriving without depending on one documentary, one interview, or one burst of public fascination. But building that system required attention, and attention came with a dangerous cost. Commercial announcements could attract interest, yet private family moments often created far greater engagement. A personal photograph, an emotional statement, or a carefully timed glimpse into their home life could travel farther than a formal business launch. That created an uncomfortable question. How much privacy could they protect while still using their personal story to support the empire meant to guarantee their freedom? Meghan allegedly believed the financial narrative had surfaced for a reason. In her view, palace-connected whispers could weaken negotiations, frighten potential partners, and create the impression that she and Harry were acting from desperation rather than ambition. She may also have suspected that royal circles wanted William's warning to appear prophetic, because every sign of pressure made the monarchy look stable and their departure look reckless. Harry's position was more conflicted. He could admire Meghan's refusal to surrender while fearing that constant visibility kept him trapped inside the royal battle he claimed to want behind him. Each new appearance strengthened their earning power, but it also invited fresh questions about the palace, the brothers, and the wounds that had never healed. Another disagreement allegedly emerged. Harry preferred smaller, reliable opportunities that could provide stability without exposing more of their private lives. Meghan reportedly believed only major, prestigious ventures could restore confidence and rebuild their global standing. Yet commercial partners were not necessarily frightened by controversy. What concerned them more was uncertainty, delays, changing strategies, abandoned ideas, and confusion over what Harry and Meghan's long-term identity truly represented. Meghan still possessed one powerful advantage: attention remained valuable. One successful venture could transform the entire financial picture. But every failed launch could drain reserves, weaken leverage, and make the next negotiation harder. Her countermove might save their independence. It might also deepen the divide between Harry and William beyond repair. And now, one final palace decision could either protect Harry's future or permanently close the door. That decision would force William to choose between proving his warning correct and saving his brother from the consequences of ignoring it. William's warning may have been accurate, but there was no triumph in watching it unfold. Behind the numbers stood two brothers divided by pride, grief, loyalty, and incompatible ideas of freedom, while the monarchy prepared to protect itself from a financial crisis that could become a family catastrophe. For William, being right allegedly brought no satisfaction. The concern he had voiced years earlier now appeared to be taking shape. Yet the price was not measured only in money. It was measured in distance, silence, and a relationship damaged so deeply that even concern could be mistaken for judgment. His frustration reportedly remained intense. Harry had been warned about permanent expenses, unreliable attention, and the danger of building a life around promises that could change. But beneath that frustration was another fear. Harry's children could eventually inherit the consequences of decisions they had never made. William may have believed that protecting the future meant confronting the problem before financial pressure narrowed every remaining choice. Harry, however, faced a different pain. To see his brother's warning repeated as proof that leaving had been reckless would feel like public humiliation. What he had described as freedom could now be framed as miscalculation. Every new deal, appearance, or request for protection risked being interpreted as evidence that William had understood the danger better than he had. Meghan would likely reject that conclusion completely. Temporary pressure did not erase what they had built, nor did it prove that royal life had been the better path. They still possessed influence, valuable connections, commercial potential, and the ability to rebuild. But potential alone could not stop reserves from shrinking. The monarchy now faced an impossible strategic choice. Refusing assistance could make the family appear cold and unforgiving. Offering it could create accusations of secrecy, hypocrisy, and hidden dependence. A compromise was allegedly possible, support delivered privately through security, property, or controlled arrangements, with strict conditions attached. Those conditions could include confidentiality and an end to further public attacks. For Harry, accepting them might feel like surrendering ownership of his past. Silence would not simply mean peace. It could mean allowing the palace's version of events to stand unanswered. The couple's future, therefore, depended less on the exact balance than on what came next. The alleged $6 million to $8 million was not a picture of immediate collapse. It was a countdown, enough to preserve freedom for now, but not enough to avoid difficult choices forever. Harry had inherited money, status, expectation, and pain. Yet none of those things had prepared him to build an ordinary future outside an extraordinary institution. And William was left with the bitterest victory imaginable. His warning may have protected the crown, but it may also have cost him his brother. Now only one question remained. Would Harry and Meghan rebuild their fortune through independence, or would financial pressure eventually lead them back toward the palace doors they had closed so publicly? Because in the royal family, money is never only money, it is protection, obedience, inheritance, and power. And the true balance Harry and Meghan must now confront may not be sitting in any bank at all.